How's everyone doing? I have a small message for you guys. Did you guys know that it really does not please God when we believers make other believers stumble? This is serious. If you guys read right here in Mark 9 from verse 42 to verse 48, you guys will see that Jesus uses graphic language to show us the seriousness of making other believers stumble, to show us and to warn us of not doing it. There's double punishment that God does. There's eternal punishment for the unbelievers, but there's also temporal punishment for us believers if we are in disobedience to God. It displeases God so much if we make other believers stumble, to the point that he says right here in this graphic language that we're better off dead than making others stumble. Like I said, you guys can read it from verse 42 to verse 48. And this verse 42 is not talking about child abuse, because some professing believers use this verse for child abuse. Of course, it does not please God for adults to abuse of children, but this is not what the verse is talking about. Right here, when it speaks of children, it's talking about us believers. Jesus, he simply uses a child as an example of humbleness, of us being humble, us depending on God for salvation, for sanctification, and also to know that it is God the one who gives us the gifts, just like he did to the disciples. See, when you guys read from verse 33 to the end, to 50, you guys will see that after Jesus uses the child, John, he tells Jesus that they seen someone casting out devils and that they stopped him from doing that. So then Jesus tells them, no, do not stop him. And then he goes on in verse 40 and he says, for he who is not against us is in our side. So in that sense is how the disciples, they ended up making that person that was casting out devils, they ended up making him stumble. So we could be the same, us that preach the gospel, us that teach. Sometimes we could make younger believers stumble. We put them down probably. We discourage them from preaching if they're attempting to preach. And that's not right, because they could discourage them and they could end up falling in sin for being discouraged. And then I'm going to read right here in chapter 12, 3 of Romans. Listen to what it says. It reminds me of everything that I just spoke of right here from Mark. And Romans right here, 12:3, it says, for I say through the grace of God given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. See, so perhaps this is what the disciples did when they seen that man casting out devils. They probably, they didn't understand, obviously. They didn't understand that God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. And they probably, since they were talking from the get-go, you guys will see in verse 33, they were talking about who's the greatest among themselves. Perhaps, most likely, that's what happened, that they were thinking highly of themselves, and that's why they were talking about who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And then Jesus rebukes them by using the child as an example. Amen. So let's examine ourselves that we don't make others stumble. There's many forms we can make others stumble. You guys can read in Romans 14, for example, it talks about right there that if the brother that doesn't eat meat, if it offends him for us to eat meat in front of him, don't eat meat in front of him. If it offends him to not keep a day, then hey, don't judge that person, etc. There's many examples we could use. Fill in the blanks. Amen. Even husbands and wives and parents to children and children to parents, we all could make each other stumbles in many ways. Amen. So I leave you guys with a small message for now. I'm out. God bless you. Let's see if I come back with one more message right away, probably.